Hello, and welcome to a Total Education media production of a lecture about the shipping news by Annie Proulx. Tonight's lecture was focused specifically on how the characters in a novel interact with the world. And that's an important topic when you think about the nature of the novel. And each of the characters very specifically has some form of interaction with the world. Now, this lecture is about how they interact with the world, and I think that needs to be on an individual basis. But specifically, I'm going to not talk about Coil too much tonight, because you need to go and have a very long look at the other lecture that's on our website, not on the website, on the YouTube channel, about Coil's character. It explains his character and his interaction with the world very clearly and very specifically, and you need to watch that to get the full impact. The other thing that you probably should do is visit our website. There's a lecture on Annie Proulx's The Shipping News on there. You need to probably get the study notes or listen to the lecture, or both, so that you get the full range. I can't do it all in 15 minutes on these YouTube lectures, so it would be of assistance to you more than anything to get those notes. However, I'll do my best in these 15 minutes to cover as much as I possibly can. I'm often asked, is the shipping news a critique of globalization as such? And my answer to that is always no. And I don't think the novel itself is a critique of globalization. It's rather a more balanced view in many ways of how people interact with the world. And I think that's a better way of looking at it. I mean, in ways of thinking about the novel, you get and globalization as a particular form or term, and I don't know if that's even applicable here. We need to look very clearly at how some characters will see, some literary critics will see globalization as completely evil, and they're usually from the left and those sorts of groups on the left, and you'll get others that see globalization only positively, and they're often from what we call the political right, and there's a huge continuum in between. And I think Annie Proulx covers that very clearly in the novel. I mean, obviously we get extremes of character who see things very one way, if you like, or very left or very right, if you want to put in those sort of broad political terms. But it's more a balanced argument. And I think Annie Proulx gives a really clear, balanced view of what happens in the world. And it's balanced because different characters see the world in different ways. And I think that's the main key. And probably if this 15-minute lecture has a thesis, it would be that it's how individuals see the world that impacts on their perceptions and how the world impacts on them. And I'd like to start by looking at the argument that Turt Card has with Billy Pretty. And it's about oil. And it's on page 213. And Billy points out how things change when we look at the impact of the world on particular places and small places as such. And this argument's been raging for a while. And he points out very clearly to Turt the negative aspects. And then in turn, Turt points out to him the positive aspects of globalization. And I'd like to read that section because I think it shows balance, and I think it shows really what Annie Proulx is doing. It's not about the world as such collapsing on people. It's about the perception of people and how they see the world. And I'd just like to look at that section. You'll find this on page 213 of your novel. It's in the chapter called Oil. And Billy Pretty says, it's chasing the money and buying plastic speedboats and snowmobiles and funny dogs from the mainland. It's hanging around bars, it's murders and stealing. It's tearing off your clothes and pretending you're loony. It used to be a happy life here. See? It was joyful. It was a joyful life. You wouldn't know what I'm speaking of, Turt Card. You with your terrible need to go to Florida. Why waste my breath? And that's that one aspect of globalization, and certainly one way of viewing the oncoming oil and the oil rigs and the changing world. Turt responds to that very clearly, and he points out to Billy in a later argument, a paragraph or so on, if it was them days now, Mr. Pretty, you'd be dead. You forget the Chinese flu you got a few winters back in hospital with it. I seen you in that bed grey as a dead cod. I thought, well, he's had it. But they give you antibiotics and oxygen and all, and you live to bite the hand that saved you. Nobody in their right mind would go back to them hard times. People was only kind because life was so dirty you couldn't afford to have any enemies. It was all swim or all sink. A situation that makes people very sweet, sucking air over his teeth. And that balanced argument there shows that they're looking at the same thing. They're looking at the coming of oil as such, and the discovery of oil and how they're going to drill for oil. And they're coming at it from two completely different angles. And I don't think Annie Prue's that extreme in the novel at all times. There are characters on the continuum. If you take Turt as an example on the right and Billy as an example on the left, I think you'll find there are characters all the way through. And she does point out things like, again, like, for example, Cole writes the article, nobody hangs a picture of an oil tanker. And Turt changes that around. And it's so easy to look at the same thing and manipulate it and change it. And I talk about the discussion that Coyle and Turt have in the other lecture that's available on the website. I think it's very important that you come to terms with what Prue is doing in the novel, and there are very many characters that you can approach, and some very specifically, and I've talked about those in the character assessments in the other video lectures, but here I want to talk about that dichotomy, the dilemma that people have about analysing the impact of the global and the positives and negatives. And often you'll find that people only look at it one way, and that's not the best approach, especially to a novel of this nature. It's about finding a balance in life, and the characters in this often they do. And Coyle, for example, finds balance in some ways in his life after a long period of hardship. And other characters move away to do so. Turt eventually does move and goes away and gets a job in the oil industry. And there's lots of different characters who adjust to the world. And I want to talk, what are the positives that then, Turt mentions positives, and we see some of the negatives through the novel. And I'll talk about those in a moment, but I want to talk about the positives first. Freedom of movement is one thing in that changing world. If you're stuck on Newfoundland and you couldn't get off and you didn't like the life, you had to like it. But now with freedom of movement, changing transport, the modernisation of communications, we see much different. And it affects Coyle in many ways, because we look on page 30 and Aunt Agnes is talking to him, and she says at the start of the novel, "It makes sense," she said, "for you to start a new life in a fresh place. For the children's sake as well as your own, it would help you all get over what's happened. You know, it takes a year, a full turn of the calendar, to get over losing somebody. That's a true saying, and it helps if you're in a different place. And what place would be more natural than where your family came from? Maybe you could ask around, your newspaper friends, tap the grapevine, there might be a job in there. Just the trip would be an experience for the girls, see another part of the world." Now, in old times that wouldn't be so possible, and certainly tapping your friends as such from such great distances wouldn't be available. So freedom of movement is one thing, and we see freedom of movement in Nutbeam, who's sailing around the world, and even though his yacht gets ruined, he can still move. We see that freedom of movement in Turt, who goes and gets a job. That's a benefit. We see other benefits throughout the text too. We see health, communication, education, all those sorts of things that have been improved. And, even someone like Dennis, who is a bit of a traditionalist in many ways, has manipulated and used the global to suit his opinion. Some of the negatives we can see through Jack, the seal hunting, the tradition of seal hunting's faded, the tradition of catching herring, the lobstering, the fishing. They talk about the fishing and how the fishing's all gone. We see other forms of tradition like Alvin Yark and his boat building, and how that's such a traditional thing, how he sings and it's slow, and it's not a process that's suited to a modern fast-paced world. And those people either adapt and change, or they certainly die. What else have we got here? We see lots of tradition being bypassed for modernity, especially by the young people. And we also see traditional lifestyles versus the fast pace of the city. And Coil is your best example of that, and I've talked at length and extensively about that in the lecture on Coil. So I won't recap that here. I think what we're really looking at here is finding, when you're writing about the novel, you're not writing about necessarily the extremes, although you mentioned you're looking for characters along the continuum, and Jack Buggett is certainly one of those characters along the continuum. Wavy's another one. Wavy is able to use the modern, and she manipulates the education system to suit her son, and she fights for rights, and she knows how to do that by going through the systems that the modern world has. But yet she also makes traditional Newfoundland trinkets and sells those to tourists. So she has a little bit of both worlds in her. And I think that's very important to find characters such as those two that have that balance in their lives. Recapping, I think we need to look at how an individual sees things and how that affects their reality. And if we look at it very closely, we have someone like Coil who sees Newfoundland as a place where he can grow and thrive. He starts a family, he develops a network of friends, and he's not, as he was in the city, isolated, alone, looked upon as somewhat weird. I mean, there's enough strange people in this book on Newfoundland to certainly make Coil feel at home or at ease. And many of the characters are flawed, much the same as he is, and I think he finds that a wonderful place to be, a place of calm and a place of help, and a place that he can settle into. Now that exact same place for someone like Dawn Budgell is a complete prison. She hates it. She would do anything to get off it. It doesn't suit her. But it's exactly the same place. It's how characters look at it, perceive it, and how it, more importantly, probably affects them in that way. And it's a very emotional thing. I mean, Coil's going home, for Dawn it is home, and she can't wait to get away. And there's all those emotional impacts you need to look for in the novel, and try and tie your ideas to that. What else have we got here? The sense that there are characters also who like the island and would be quite happy to live there, but it doesn't actually do enough for them. So for Dennis Buggett, for example, and if we look at Dennis, he loves living on the island. He doesn't want to leave, but there's not enough work for him, and he can't necessarily bring up his family. And I think he's part of that continuum about people, because of a changing world and because of a changing society, need to move and adapt, or else find new ways to do things. And I think Aunt Agnes is an outstanding example of that. Aunt Agnes is a character who can adapt and changes her business, changes her lifestyle, and when the business doesn't work on Newfoundland, she moves it away. So you're looking for all those sorts of adaptations. So when you think of the global, and you think of characters who have to navigate the global, and this being a shipping book, the word navigation ties in beautifully and gives you a lovely lead in, a link between paragraphs and areas. That sense of navigating the global is extremely important, and developing the shipping news and seeing characters in that particular way. I'm Bruce Pattinson, and that's all we have from Total Education Media tonight. Don't forget to press the like button down below to keep these videos going. Have a look on our website, the lectures. There are other lectures there, and certainly lectures on other texts that you'll be studying. So go visit us at totaleducationcentre.com.au. Good night.